Hello, my name is Allison Michael, and I chose to do my review on Funny Bones, Posada and His Day of the Dead Calaveras by Duncan Tonatiuh. Duncan Tonatiuh is a Mexican-American author who grew up in Mexico. A lot of his books have to deal with the Latino culture and aspects of his life while he lived in Mexico as a child. His illustrations are mainly based off of the pre-Columbian era, and he is a continuous proponent for workers' rights in the United States. I chose this book because I've always been interested in the Day of the Dead. I think it's an absolutely fantastic holiday, and this book really has a lot to do with the people who made the Day of the Dead special. I also chose this book because it has won numerous awards. It is the recipient of the Pura Belpre Award, which is given to authors who best portray Latino cultural experiences in books written for children or youth. It has also received the Robert F. Sibert Award for the best informational picture book in the United States. So this book is basically about the life of Jose Guadalupe Posada. He was the creator of the Calaveras, which are the fun, festive skeletons that we often associate with the Day of the Dead. As you can see here, they are often represented having fun. They're not supposed to be scary. And Posada actually did this on purpose because he wanted people to have fun on El Dia de los Muertos, and he did not want it to be a holiday that was feared. He grew up in a little city called Aguas Calientes, which is Spanish for hot water. He loved to draw. He always loved art. But he kind of gave up on that because his family really needed money, so he began working in a print shop, as you can see here. He did this for quite some time, but then when he got a little bit older, he began working for a newspaper drawing their political cartoons. The newspaper was called El Jicote, and his political cartoons mainly dealt with politicians that he did not agree with or that his family did not agree with, and they were often to make fun of them. So he wasn't really popular among the politicians of the time. As you can see here, this is one of his political cartoons. This is an original piece by Posada that Tonatiuh decided to include within the text. In 1888, his little town was destroyed in a huge flood, so he was forced to move to Mexico City, and that's kind of where the Calavera was born. On the Day of the Dead celebrations, he would sell these things called literary calaveras, which is kind of similar to the one you see on the right. And they were just fun little poems that he made to tell jokes and to tell humorous stories, and many people loved them. They thought they were amusing and a great distraction from life. He then began to illustrate them, and that's kind of where our modern day vision of the Calavera was born. So his art really did kind of evolve with the time. When people began riding bicycles in Mexico City, his Calaveras also began riding bicycles, as you can see here. He also did a lot of illustrations during the Mexican Revolution that portrayed the political leaders of the time in not that flattering of a light, but it still gave people a lot of comfort, and they found humor in a lot of their desperate situations. So it's kind of similar to what you see here on the right. And he just continued to be an influential artist, and I think many people related to him because he drew things that they could relate to. He did die in January 20th of 1913, and he is still remembered today for his famous calaveras, and his art even inspired a lot of the costumes we do see on the Day of the Dead. So I think this book was really interesting. I learned a lot about printing techniques, including lithography, etching, and engraving. I can't really go into what every single one of them was, but my favorite one was etching. It's this process where you put acid on the paper to engrave it into it. So it was really cool. He kind of pioneered that printing technique in Mexico, so I thought that was really cool. I had no idea that there was actually an artist behind the calaveras, so it was really cool to learn about the person who created them. I think it's really sad that his village got destroyed in 1888, so he had to move to a big city he wasn't that familiar with. His drawings were often lively and fun, except for during the Mexican Revolution. They kind of took on a dark, ominous tone, and there's actually an example of this in the book. See on the right, you can see his skeleton takes on a darker tone. It's a little bit more scary than his original creations. He also drew these skeletons that looked like women, and he called them Catrinas, and they were basically supposed to portray the snobby women of the day, so the women who wore too much makeup going around acting like they were better than everybody else. And as I aforementioned, his artwork inspired many of the costumes that we see on the Day of the Dead. And I learned a lot about what people do on the Day of the Dead, and a lot of the things that they buy. So one thing that they buy is pan de muerto, which is bread of the dead, alicuenes, which are sugar skeletons, and papel picado, which are paper cutouts of the calaveras. So there was a lot in there about Mexican culture that I had never really considered before, and I really enjoyed reading about it. So as far as his accuracy is concerned, I think he drew a lot of this from his own experiences celebrating the Day of the Dead. But you can also see from the bibliography in the back of the book that he did a lot of research on Posada's life and on his effect on illustrations and on artwork. So you can see that here in this bibliography. Also, the category I would put his nonfiction into is interpretive, because while it does give a lot of facts of Posada, he kind of tells it as a story, so it kind of takes the reader on a journey, which you find in interpretive nonfiction. His structure is expository. There are some kind of elements in there of storytelling, but he mostly just focuses on explaining Posada's life and his effect on art. I think for his descriptive pattern, he used a lot of description. So he described a lot of the events of Posada's life, but he mostly used sequence to organize his book. So it basically starts at the beginning of Posada's life and goes to the very, very end of his life. I think the most interesting thing about his book is the title. His title really draws the reader in. It's called Funny Bones, and it makes the reader really stop and think, well, hey, what is this about? He doesn't really use a lot of humor, but the colors and the illustration are really what captivate the reader. I mean, look at this. It's absolutely stunning, his artwork. And as I said before, he uses a lot of descriptive language, and I think from his point of view, the reader is really able to step into his shoes and see Posada's life from his point of view. He uses organizational tools in the back of his book, like a glossary and like an index and like an author's note that explains the Day of the Dead to people in a more descriptive way. Here's his glossary. The other interesting thing he does throughout this book is his art is often juxtaposed with Posada's art. So like, for instance, you can see here is Tonatiuh's representation of two political leaders during the Mexican Revolution, and here's actually an original piece of artwork done by Posada himself of his calaveras during that time period. I think the text really helped me understand more about Latino culture. It really drug the reader in, but I think his artwork was really the most powerful, because I think his artwork really represented his culture in a really strong way. There were no negative stereotypes. It was very easy to be captivated by these pictures. I think this book would be appropriate for anyone from about ages 10 to 14. He really made it so that it was simple enough for kids to understand, but I don't think that older children would really get bored by it. I think they would really enjoy it. And I would definitely recommend this book. It gives an accurate representation of the Latino culture, and I think kids need to be exposed to that at a time period like this where there are so many stereotypes about Latinos. But the illustrations are also amazing, and it's simplistic enough that any child could understand it. Thank you so much.